Jane Firth advises executives and their teams and provides deep expertise in the areas of leadership, performance, and executive presence. For her outstanding work, Jane was awarded the Philadelphia Business Journal's Women of Distinction Award. As an industry innovator, Jane has created state of the art leadership development programs and tools. Her studies in human behavior, executive performance, and organizational culture, combined with her expertise as an executive coach, led to the development of concepts and models now revealed in Grit, Grace, and Gravitas, the three keys to transforming leadership presence and impact, co authored with Andrea Zins. Jane's other programs include the Inspirator Generative Leadership Program, Mastering the Complexities of Change Leadership, the Executive Empowerment Program, Leadership, Identity, and Executive Presence. Jane has an MS in Organizational Dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania and has completed extensive studies in leadership, the psychology of leadership, transformational leadership, human potential, human behavior, and development educational psychology, art therapy, psychoanalytical theory, and Eastern philosophies.
Much.
Jane is joined by her colleague and co-author of Grace and Gravitas, Dr. Andrea Zins, who is an executive coach working primarily with senior and high potential leaders in business units of Fortune 500 corporations and mid-sized companies in a variety of business sectors. Andrea's strategic focus is the development of strong leadership pipeline. She has deep expertise in raising self awareness and creating high performance teams through coaching and mentoring. Andrea co authored her first book, Orchestrating Sustainable Innovation, A Symphony in Sound Bites with Marilyn Blocker and Megan Mitchell. In addition to Andrea's section of the book regarding how to lead innovation, the book includes advice by best-selling authors, leading business consultants, educators from highly regarded academic institutions, and executives and practitioners at innovation leading companies. Andrea received her MA and PhD from Fielding Graduate University and is a member of the National Organizational Dynamics Network. Please join me in welcoming our two speakers for today, Andrea Zenz and Jane Ford. On to you guys.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jane, it's up to you to start. So.
Okay. So, we've sort of been talking a little bit about this already, that we are living and working in unprecedented times that began with the onset of COVID-19. And we've all encountered many, many unexpected challenges that have impacted our work, our home environments, and have had an emotional impact on all of our lives. Hundreds of articles have attempted to describe the complexities. I know Andrea and I would love to sit with each one of you and find out what are the things you've been up against and how has this experience impacted your personal and professional life. But as a result of all that we've all experienced, we see it that we're now facing a new beginning. There's no going back to what was. And we could look at it like a new era and we really believe wholeheartedly that it's an era in which exemplary leadership and teamwork is really needed, maybe more than ever. We need more harmony and a different type of precision and rigor that's less command and control, where leaders have the skills that allow the fostering of cultures of collaboration and inspiration and innovation. So our book provides maps and methods regarding what we call the constructive power of grace. And the book will outline how the constructive power of grace helps us effectively shape the exemplary leadership that we see needed for this new era. While every leader is unique, exemplary leaders possess social, emotional intelligence that allows them to successfully lead through a combination of three critical, non-negotiable factors. They have grit. And what is that? It's an uncompromising commitment to performance excellence and strategic focus. For example, grit is critical for overcoming obstacles, for having difficult conversations, for the kind of persistence needed in getting to a desired finish line where there are obstacles. Secondly, exemplary leaders have gravitas. They have a depth of professional knowledge and competence that contributes to excellence in performance. For example, a critical aspect of a leader's gravitas is due to the time and energy they've invested to acquire the knowledge and skills they have to date, the risks they've taken, the commitment and discipline to excel, and to ask a lot of themselves. But thirdly, and this is the all-important difference that we've found, exemplary leaders have a different kind of impact with those they lead. Even when difficult challenges arise, the net effect of their impact is positive because their grit and their gravitas are infused with the constructive power of grace. So grace is relating to others constructively, in considerate, empathetic, and genuinely caring ways. We've seen that with grit and gravitas infused with grace, exemplary leaders have developed a very positive presence that allows them to have a transformative impact, allows them to elevate emotional operating states, their own and that of those they lead. They successfully integrate their grit and their gravitas with grace, and we'll go into what happens when grit and gravitas are not integrated with grace. But for now, we just want to underline that there is a secret to the considerable value of grace because it changes your impact for the better. It increases the value of your grit and it increases the value of your gravitas, increases the value of each of them. The skills and qualities of grace are rooted in using power, using whatever power we have constructively. On the door to Oprah Winfrey's office is a sign that reads, "Be responsible for the energy you bring into this room." Why would that be? Because your presence, each and every one, carries energy, which in its simplest form is either positive or negative. For instance, is your impact warm and welcoming? Does it open things up? Does it shut things down? One of our clients, Mary, was an executive in a large financial services firm who led people in her division through an extremely difficult period. After the project ended, her boss called her into his office and said, "Mary, people are complaining about your leadership." And Mary was a little incredulous about that. And she said to him, "Well, what do you want? Results or happy people?" And her boss responded to her, letting her know that in his humble opinion, Mary, the best leaders achieve both results and happy people. So she had the grit and the gravitas to get through this difficult period. But lacking the skills and qualities of grace, her team wound up feeling disempowered, disheartened, and depleted. An exemplary leader would have had a more constructive and positive impact, a knowledge and focus on the importance of his or her team's resilience, melding the persistence that comes with grit and the know-how that comes from Gravitas with the inspiration and energy that comes from grace. With grace, a leader will be able to inspire, energize, and empower the men and women they lead in meaningful ways to find their way through difficult times. And with grace, Mary would have been able to do that.
Great. So picking it up from here, everyone's presence has impact. There's no mystery here. You don't have to be an extrovert, and it's not something you're born with. The skills needed to transform leadership are readily available to us all. Now, constructive power is always within our reach, and when we reach for it, our impact changes for the better, enhancing our approaches to people, our behaviors with others, the quality of how we connect with people, and our demeanor. That means our overall attitude and way of being. Grace helps us deal with difficult people and situations with compassion, with energy, and with inspiration. So let's start with how grace helps us deal with difficult situations. Think of a recent time that your emotions were triggered at work or with what you're doing, your practice. For instance, maybe someone criticized you in front of everyone in a meeting, or you felt embarrassed, or perhaps you may have felt upset because you were passed over for something you thought you deserved, or maybe you felt frustrated in trying to explain something that you were trying to get across to someone, and rather than struggle in the moment, find fault with yourself or blame someone else. Grace gives you compassionate permission to take time to gather your thoughts. Grace helps you understand the emotions you feel, regain your composure, and to find the clarity you need to more effectively deal with what happened. So let's take a look at leaders you've admired. Each of us have people we've been inspired by, and in real life, in politics, admirable characters in books or films or documentaries. What we've all had role models who impact the way we lead, the way we treat others. Who have you admired as a leader? Who have you been inspired by, or wanting to be like or emulate? And who stands out for you? So let's take 2 minutes together to think of maybe one or two people you've admired. What did you like about their approaches to situations? What did you notice about their behaviors, about the quality of how they connected with you or others? What did you notice about their overall attitude and demeanor that stood out? For example, did they make you feel psychologically safe? Did they make sure you knew you were valued, respected, cared about? What stood out for you about them? So let's pause for about 2 minutes so you can maybe jot down a few thoughts that might come to mind. And then we'll talk about what it is you've seen in your insights.
So in terms of presence, and you've highlighted some things about leaders you've admired and things you've seen them do. Probably there was some grace and constructive approaches, behaviors, etc., that just struck chords with you. And there's a way that we can, each of us can elevate the impact of our presence. And we try to break this down. We try to really get at the heart and soul of what is going on when grace is moving through leaders. And we came to 2 pillars that it rests on: reaction management and relationship intelligence. Reaction management refers to our capacity to understand our reactions and the reactions of others, not through a judgmental lens, but through a lens that recognizes what's happening so as to find the best way forward to deal with something. And the leaders that don't pay attention to managing their reactions can leave a lot of negativity in their wake. And so what we find with exemplary leaders is it matters to them to understand and manage their own reactions, understand the reactions that people they lead are having, and be constructive with all of that towards outcomes that are worth having, and leaving in their wake something positive, leaving people with something positive, no matter how difficult the conversation, no matter how difficult the challenge. And the second pillar is about relationship intelligence. And why do we say relationship intelligence? Because if you think about it, emotional intelligence has to do with all of our relationships, including the one we have with ourselves. Starts with that. And so the more a leader understands the dynamics of relating in constructive, social, emotional ways. We're not going to have time to go into this one this evening with you, but we have a model we call the beta model in our book, which really outlines how leaders can bring relationship intelligence to bring culture to a place they want it to be, where people feel not only psychologically safe and valued and appreciated, but also there's a synergy and an innovation that's able to happen. So everything that's involved, the skills and the qualities involved in reaction management and relationship intelligence, we spell that out very clearly, in our book. We leave no mysteries there. But once a leader has a grasp of that, and we were talking a little earlier about we need to understand none of us are perfect. We all have what Andrea and I call foibles and flaws. So how do we constructively work with ourselves to be the best we can be? And when we make a mistake, to go on in a better way. So these are some of the things that we want to be able to master. All right, so with the two pillars, leaders bring people together in very meaningful ways. They understand what matters to people. They take the time to understand that, what matters to every person on their team or in their group or whatever way of being together, whether that's family, work, extracurricular, things that we do to make a contribution in the world. We want to understand what matters to people and what helps people feel that they're doing something meaningful in whatever context that is. So before we talked about what approaches did you notice, what behaviors did you notice, what was the quality of the connection you noticed that people that stood out to you had, and what was their demeanor? If you want to understand someone's presence, you simply have to look at what we call the A, B, C, and D of it. What are their approaches like? What are their behaviors like? What is the quality of how they connect with people? And what is their demeanor, their overall way of being and attitude? And again, we're not talking about perfection here. We all have our days where, I just moved. I was not my finest today with all the boxes and everything I am. There's so much going on here. But we have to recover, and we have to allow ourselves to recover in a way that we can go on in a better way. But let's look at what happens. We said we would look a little bit into this when there's an imbalance in, for instance, someone's grit. So grit without grace can be very abrasive. I hope I wasn't abrasive today, but I might have been. One's imbalance of too much grit can come across as domineering. So for instance, when a leader's brusque impatience or intolerance has people walking on eggshells, or when the imbalance of too little grit could have a leader avoid holding people to account or avoid having that difficult conversation they just don't want to have. Gravitas without grace could show up as arrogance. The imbalance of too much gravitas can come across as condescending. The imbalance of too little gravitas can have a leader come across as hesitant and indecisive, or leave people without clear guidance and direction. So grace will change how a leader leads, how he or she establishes the norms of the culture and determines that social contract of how people are going to relate to one another. What's acceptable and what isn't. You know, how do we treat people? Do we really care about people, or do we just say we really care about people? You know, is our credo words on a piece of paper, or is it alive in how we are every day? So let's look at what some of the imbalances in grit and in gravitas that you've encountered with leaders. What are some of the imbalances you've come across? You know, where too much grit or too little grit, too much gravitas or too little gravitas. Let's talk about that. Just make a few notes and let us know when you're ready.
Jane mentioned reaction management skills, which sort of change and elevate a leader's perspective towards one's emotional reactions. And also considering how reaction management can transform the impact of a leader's presence. I worked with a guy that I'm going to call Kyle, and Jane and I both know Kyle, who is a sales executive relative to his new role. And early on, a situation took place that gave him the opportunity to put his reaction management skills into practice. So here's what happened with him. In preparing for his quarterly executive meeting, Kyle's new team prepared the market information and the sales projections he needed for the meeting. And the team, wanting to make the results seem better than they were and not wanting to admit that they were struggling with certain sales and profits results, provided Kyle with projections that were too optimistic about the remainder of the year and the year to follow. Now, it didn't occur to Kyle to double check the report he'd received, and he made the mistake of taking the work at face value. And as a result, in the executive meeting, Kyle found himself in a very uncomfortable, compromised position. And from the view of the CEO and his peers, he looked as though he wasn't on top of the market trends and he lacked control over his team. And as you can imagine, this was embarrassing, and he froze, kind of like a deer in the headlights. He didn't become defensive, but he kept his composure outwardly. And but inwardly during that time, his mind was racing, and he shrank back, waiting for the meeting to end. And he wanted to get to his office as quickly as possible and just process what had happened in private. So let's look at how Kyle managed his reactions and decided to go forward. And the very first thing he did was to recognize the tension he was feeling. And he noticed his hands were shaking, and he took some slow breaths to calm himself. Then Kyle looked more deeply at the emotions he was feeling and the messages they contained. And he realized that he felt exposed and embarrassed, and he felt his hands then stop shaking, and he felt his composure returning. Next, he asked his administrator to hold his calls for 30 minutes. He closed his door, and he took out a paper and a pen, writing the word embarrassed at the top of the page. And then he listed his concerns and thoughts, put it down on paper. And so after he got that out, he then wrote down the word anxiety. And he listed the thoughts and concerns that came to his mind about what happened with his team. And he saw his responsibility for having taken the information the team had given him at face value. So Kyle thought about what would be an outcome worth having. And then he wrote down some notes for himself, envisioning outcomes like strengthening his leadership or relationship with his team, and steps he could take to restore his reputation with his peers and his boss. So here are a few of the actions he did take. I'll just give you a few. One, he met with his boss. He took responsibility. He asked for advice about the approaches he could take with his team and his peers. He pulled his staff together then to discuss the experience he'd had at the executive meeting, and he let them know that straight talk and honesty was critical in how he wanted them to work together going forward. In fact, he said to them something like, the facts are the facts, and we can work with them and strategize together, whatever they are. And Kyle and his staff then established their rules of engagement together. And the team worked through a plan that Kyle approved, and they clearly understood what would be expected of them. So while it might seem that it would take a lot of time to go through these steps, if you think about the time and energy it would take to deal with the residual damage if this kind of situation is allowed to go unchecked, without reaction management, situations like this can derail teamwork and productivity, and also morale and performance can suffer.